I'm antique clock specialist Gary Sullivan. I'm here at my shop again. Today we're going to talk about Banjo clocks, or patent timepieces as they were originally known. They were patented in 1802 in Roxbury, Massachusetts by Simon Willard. This form became enormously popular, and they're still popular with collectors today, although very few of them survive in original condition. And what I'd like to do is talk about how we disassemble them and pack them for shipping. We ship these clocks all over the country. Sometimes we have to have them shipped to us. So there are some procedures that we go through to pack them carefully so that they're not damaged in the shipping. So if we look at an example of a Banjo clock, we see that they have these reverse painted glass panels. Now 80 to 90% of the value of an original Banjo clock can be in the originality of the glass panels. They rarely survive. So we definitely don't want to damage those in the shipping. And because of the fact that they have to be handled very carefully, we actually remove these frames with the panels from the clock for shipping. Now typically a Banjo clock is hung from a metal hanger that's attached to the back of the case. And additionally, there are typically one or two screws that are driven through the backboard into the wall to secure it, to keep it from sliding back and forth. So a clock that's running should actually have at least one screw inside. Now in this instance, I have removed the screw already, so it's ready to be unhooked from the wall. But before we do that, let's look at some of the components. Here is the pendulum that swings back and forth. In behind this metal pan is an iron or a lead weight that slides up and down inside the clock to power it. Now those are metal pieces that can swing forward and hit the glass, so we want to be careful that we handle it properly so that we do not damage the glass. So in order to disassemble the clock, we have to take it off the wall. That's something that we want to do laying flat on a table. So we start by supporting the bottom of the clock, and I reach right up here to the throat section where I can get a good grip on it, and I actually lift it right off of the hanger. It's a little bit heavy because it's got a weight inside, but not too bad. And then we lay it down on a nice flat surface to work on it. Now we want to be careful in handling a clock like this not to lift the lower section up above the upper section, because that weight inside can slide forward and do damage to the movement, or it can entangle the cord that it hangs from. So we definitely want to keep it flat or tipped forward a little bit. There are some major components to be dealt with here. We have the lower door, which is hinged. We will be removing the screws and taking this door off to pack it separately. We have the throat frame that has a glass in it. We'll be removing that. We'll also be removing the face or the dial from the clock so that we can pack that very carefully and protect the paint on it. So if you move in a little bit closer, we'll look carefully at how we disassemble the clock. Here we are with the clock all laid out for disassembly, and the first thing that we will remove is the dial or the face of the clock. But before we do that, we have to remove the hands. Now on an antique Banjo clock, the hands are always held in place by a tapered metal pin right here. And we need to slide that pin out. Now very often the pin is long enough that you can actually grasp it with your fingers and remove it while you press down a little bit on the hands below it. So in this case, I press down and slide that pin out. Sometimes the pin is tight enough that we need to use pliers. Push down on the hand, remove the pin with the pliers, and we want to be careful not to scratch the dial in the process. So there is the pin removed. I'm actually going to place it right into a Ziploc bag. We want to keep track of these parts so we don't lose them. There's generally a washer that's laid right over the top of the minute hand. And the minute hand usually just lifts right off. There it is. We put that in the bag. The hour hand is a friction fit, and very often you have to move it back and forth as you're pulling it off. It comes straight out. We put that in the bag and seal it up. Now the dials are secured in a couple of different ways. Sometimes they have these so-called dog legs. This is a little L-shaped piece of metal that is screwed into the wood, and it's simply turned to catch the edge of the dial. So I take a pliers and turn that dog leg back so that it's no longer holding the dial down. In this case we have two different fasteners. There's a screw on this side. It probably had a dog leg originally that broke or was missing. So I take a screwdriver and remove the screw. So whichever method of fastening is incorporated in your clock, you want to disconnect the dial, and then it lifts straight off. So with the dial removed, we can get a look at the brass movement that's hit inside the clock here. You can see that I have replaced the screw that was holding the dial on so that it doesn't get confused or lost. Starting at the top, we have the pendulum with the block here that it's suspended from. Here's the suspension spring that bends as the pendulum swings, moving down into the pendulum rod. And as we remove the throat frame, we'll get a better look at that pendulum rod. So in order to remove the throat frame, we need a good screwdriver, and they can be held in place by different methods. Sometimes they have screws at the top and at the bottom. Sometimes they have screws that go right through the front of the frames. In this instance, we've got two screws at the top and two at the bottom. We'll remove those, and the throat frame will lift right out of the clock. Now the frame is free to take out. We can set that right down. I'm going to take the screws from the frame and put them right back in the holes where they belong so that we don't lose them or get them confused. I'll put those back in and tighten them up. So now we want to remove this hinged lower door. It's held in place by these two tiny hinges that have very small screws in them, and the screws often have tiny little slots, so it's important to have just the right screwdriver in order to remove these screws, and in some cases they haven't been out for a very long time. So it may be a good idea to invest in a nice new sharp jeweler's screwdriver that is the correct size to remove those screws with tiny little slots. So I start here with the first screw and carefully remove that. I'll work my way up. I've placed a piece of foam underneath the door here to support it as I'm removing the screws. And I'm keeping the screws in the correct order as I take them out so that they will go right back into the same holes, because with these handmade screws sometimes the threads are slightly different from one to the other, and we want to put the screws back in the same holes that they've been in. So that's removed, and we can lift the door right off. So now the throat frame with its glass and the door with its glass are ready to be packed separately and padded so that they arrive intact at their new destination. We now want to remove the pendulum from the clock, and this is very simple. It's simply suspended from this little spring at the top. We can just unhook it and take it right out. Very simple. And then the weight is held in place with a hook of some sort. The types of hooks vary, but we want to slide the weight up a little bit and just remove that hook, and the weight will come right out of the case. And it's important that the clock be shipped with the weight removed, because it can do a lot of damage to the clock. We take off the finial. That'll be packed separately, and we'll stuff some bubble wrap or something in to protect the movement. And so now we have an empty case which can be packed separately, and all of the components that can be packed individually for shipment. So I'd like to show you my technique for packing the glasses for shipping. Here's the lower glass in its frame. What I like to do is put some soft padding, some tissue or foam on that, and then I protect them front and back with some foam core board or some heavy cardboard to keep anything from piercing them. And in this instance, I'm going to take the dial, which I've wrapped in some tissue, and put that in the same package, and then wrap that with plenty of bubble wrap. Here I've already wrapped the throat frame, and you can see it's a pretty good sized package, but keep in mind that much of the value in these is held in the originality of their glasses, so we want to be sure that the glasses arrive intact. Once we've wrapped this in bubble, we put this together. We will put that into a good sturdy carton. We will then in turn put that carton into a much larger one that is filled with styrofoam peanuts. We want to be sure that there's plenty of padding around these glasses. We will then take the case for the clock and we'll pack that in a separate carton along with the pendulum. Here we've got the pendulum strapped to a scrap of wood. Here's the finial wrapped up. We will ship those along with the case in their own carton. And here's the weight. We want to put that into a very sturdy cardboard container. We want to be careful that the hook doesn't get damaged, so we're going to pack that in there with some newspaper that's really stuffed in around it, and then double box that, because the weight of the hunk of iron moving around inside the carton can break the carton. So we'll double box that, and we'll double box this, and I'm sure everything will arrive